What is the purpose for which ritual is used?
Well, I can't quote Dion Fortune, but I'm sure that my own answer will be inherently informed by her own thoughts, because that's just part of my spiritual DNA. You know, you talk to different people, and they're going to give you different answers, and it's not opinion based. It's because there's different intent. A goetic ritual, right? Something in the Goetia, something in the grimoire tradition, is to attract a spirit, to evoke it, bind it, compact it by literally making a deal with it, and then banishing it to go and do your bidding. So a ritual for that purpose, is to have to obtain some material object or circumstance that is done by supernatural means. Okay, that's demiurgy. You do a ritual, that the kind of ritual that Dion Fortune is talking about, and it's a higher aspect of demiurgy that is facilitative of theurgy. Look at, for anybody who's familiar, look at the lesser ritual of the pentagram. Sky, you're probably familiar with it now. What is every lesser ritual of the pentagram start with?
Ata.
Well, right. But what is that a part of?
Ein Sof.
The Qabalistic Cross is what I'm shooting for. Right. That's every pentagram ritual, hexagram ritual starts with the lesser band or the Qabalistic Cross.
Yeah.
Right. That's why
for some reason I just lump it all into the same thing.
Yeah, well, it's actually the Qabalistic Cross is a micro ritual, and it's its own thing. But
I forget about that. Yeah.
If you talk about the ritual of the pentagram, it's assumed that we're doing the Qabalistic Cross, which is good habits. But you were saying, yeah, Ata, right? Because that's the first divine name. What you're doing when you bring that down, Ata, Malkut, right? That's my, like, I don't know if it's X or Y, I forget, but let's just say that's that's your vertical axis, right? Then Vegebura, Vegedula, right? That's your horizontal axis. Leolam, Amen. And then you move outward and you trace your circle, your Z axis, X, Y, and Z axis. You're creating a miniature model of the cosmos. You are placing yourself as the creator of. It's an act of cosmogenesis. You're recreating the material cosmos when you do that. X or Y, X or X, Y, and then Z. You move outward. You're creating a sphere. And that is an act of symbolic demiurgy. But ultimately, you use that as a working space, a container for your theurgy. And so theurgic ritual of the Golden Dawn is primarily to link oneself with the highest aspect of yourself, but not A to Z. It's A to B to C to D, all the way up to Z, right? Or really Z to A. But you are contacting the entire hierarchy of spiritual beings. You are literally working that ladder that we saw. You're climbing that ladder, because in reality, there's no other way to do it. And it's all based on Iamblichian theurgy. But the thing about the circuit of force, and a lot of people have it fucked because of the Eastern contamination, the transcendent kind of like, all is illusion, and we have to transcend and get beyond the material paradigm. Bullshit. You go up to come down. You go up it's not fully transcendent where bye, have fun rotting in hell. You come back down with that Promethean fire to square the circle, spiritualize matter. But you don't do that based on what Pete thinks is good. Pete did a ritual, so now Pete's spiritual. And I think it would be really good if everyone was vegetarian, and then it's just fucking chaos. What you're doing is you're ascending to the arche, to the higher divine genius, the bornless part of yourself on that Buddhic plane, and you're making a contact with it, and you're essentially saying, as you return, work through me. And so the things you do in your material life that are informed consistently by this part of yourself, by the archetype of you, the God of your microcosm, likely are not going to make sense to you. It's not going to look the way it does in the fucking movies. This is people, they learn their spirituality from like The Last Airbender. It's like, you're pumping your brain full of these fucking expectations. It's a story. Someone wrote that story. It has nothing to do with reality. Okay. And even, you read these spiritual texts and things like that. Sure, it may be, informed by some spiritual teaching, but that was their fucking thing. You know what I'm saying? Those were their, the whole idea behind a spiritual tradition is that you use the spiritual technologies to do it yourself. You're going to have a different experience, and the thing is, like, all of our different arches are not the same. My arche is not your arche. At a certain level, yes, we are united, but it ain't there. Like, we are very far away from that in reality, in terms of the accretions that our consciousness has been buried under, and so, I mean, a lot of us can't even go out to the fucking mall without severe anxiety. You want to just all of a sudden, like, just be one with everything? It's not going to happen. if you're pretending that it is, you're either lying to yourself or you're just lying to everyone else. The reality of the situation is that the spiritual, hierarchy that everything talks about, it's the same thing in Tibetan Dzogchen Buddhism. It's the same cosmology, or similar enough to be, it's not God and then us. There's like this whole choir of beings, this whole chain, and there is no direct route from multiplicity to unity. People pretend because they had like a moment of no mind that, oh, I experienced God, and we're all one. It's like, no, you zonked the fuck out. You had the first moment of mental clarity in your life, and you're mistaking it for like, God is working through me. That's not, you're experiencing things on the mental plane at that point. The mental plane is significant. If you look at it in our chain of hierarchy, it's above the astral. It's above the physical. The higher manas is what it's called. There's a higher and lower manas. That's a theosophical diagram we were looking at. Those things, yes, they're very abstract, but it's the same place that you do like abstract mentation, like math. You're just having a moment of quiet there. That's not the highest level. You're mistaking the midpoint for the highest. And the whole trajectory of ritual theurgy is to use that ladder to get as high as you can go in a physical body, which is the bornless part of yourself. You can't go any higher than that. That's that, and you meet that in Tefereth, because Tefereth on the tree of life is the medial point. It's the Christ, right? This in the middle. The sacred heart is Christ, right? Sacre Sur, because it's the medial point. That's where you go to communicate with something that can't communicate with you. The archetype of you, the spiritual archetype, the bornless part of yourself, your genius, that is the emissary of Tohen, which it can't communicate that way. So go ahead. Sorry.
Tohen, what is this?
We were talking about that earlier with the three negative veils and the Platinian concept of the absolute, and Tohen was the first principle, so to speak, but it was, you could only talk about it apophatically, right? Because it was everything in potentia undifferentiated. You can't even think about that. It's like trying to visualize a color you've never seen before.
Mm.
The brain cannot do it. It's locked. It's in a fucking escape room. Like there's no way to contemplate that. So the best you can do in a physical body at this stage of spiritual evolution is to reach your higher divine genius, the bornless part of yourself, your archetype, your arche, which exists on the Buddhic plane. Because in other theosophical diagrams of that exact thing, it tells you like there's more than the Buddhic plane. It's not worth it to talk about it because we can't understand it in this work, so in this particular book, it's in like Man Visible and Invisible. It's in some Leadbeater stuff. I've got it right here on the shelf.
Let's talk a little bit about that interesting combined glyph that you brought up of the lyre and the caduceus. It involves something called the law of impaction, or the transmission of action from one plane to another, and the law of the aspects of force of polarity.
Yeah.
I'll bring it up on the screen for people.
Yeah. So the law of impaction is basically, in other words, they call it like resonance. And it's essentially how so this is how your higher divine genius is going to communicate with you. It's not, it's going to send, if you want to look at this as like you're at the bottom and like your physical body, your persona, and the higher divine genius is at the top. It should be divided into 7 spaces, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. So your higher divine genius is going to send, and it's perfect. It's perfect, perfectly subsumed as a musical instrument with strings. Why? Because they vibrate. It's going to send that kind of vibratory, and I'm not saying this literally. I'm saying if you can picture in your head the way like a tuning fork that is tuned, like, okay, I've got like A 440 here and A 440 here, and they're matching tones. This one's vibrating and this one isn't. And this is an actual physical experiment you can either do or see done on YouTube. If this one is vibrating and you bring this close enough, it's going to start vibrating. And that's a very good analogy for the way that this law of impaction works. Spiritual impulses will be sent downward, and the material will send particular impulses upward. Again, it's a circuit of force. We're constantly talking about, people have it wrong a lot of the time. Not everybody, not all the time. But the overarching consensus seems to be, at least from what I'm hearing from the peanut gallery, is that we have to transcend. It's a one-way fuck. No, you go up and you come down, and then it's not over. Congratulations, you went on your first ride. You do that for the rest of your fucking life. Like that's it. That's the circuit of force. That's spiritual theurgy, right? Iamblichus didn't talk about you leave the material spheres forever. No, he's saying you die and you don't reincarnate. That's the point of theurgy for him. I don't want to come back. So it's the same thing with the Gnostics. The Gnostics had the same ascension ritual. The Merkaba mystics had the same ascension ritual. You see it in the Pymander. When he talks about divesting, as when you leave the body after death, divesting yourself of the vices. He didn't say anything good, right? Pymander says, at the first gate you shed, whatever it is. I can't remember off of head, but it's off the top of my head. But it's always something negative because you're shedding the vices as you go upward. You're becoming more pure, really. So that's the whole idea. But it's in the Golden Dawn. It's exemplified in a diagram called the sword and the serpent.
What is the Rainbow Bridge?
Oh God. You're killing me. No, it's great. It's fantastic. I'm just all right. So let me take my jacket off.
All right.
So essentially there's a couple of different conceptions of it, but the earliest one I see is Guess.
The earliest conception of the Rainbow Bridge?
Yeah. I mean, you know me. You've watched my videos. Try and take a guess at the first time that, like, the earliest that you can find it in the historical record in the West.
Plato?
Yes. Yes. It's in Plato. That's going to be the answer every time.
That's hilarious.
But it's in Plato. It's in the myth of Ur, the spindle of Anagke, the great karmic mechanism of the universe that runs from the heavens indefinitely. Doesn't even know where it begins, and it runs through the material universe, passes through it, and doesn't know where it ends. Doesn't know where it begins, doesn't know, but it's this massive beam of light that he says are all the colors of the rainbow. And we see that later. Actually, what's really interesting, believe it or not, is there is a Norse god. I forget his name, but he was conceived of as like being a tantamount to I think like Hamadeller or something like that, or Nodor, one of those names. You can look it up, but there's a Norse god that's conceptualized as being the Saturnian outer sphere, the god of that outer sphere, and he guards the Rainbow Bridge, which is in old Norse German mythology, which really, I mean, until the Romans didn't really have much interaction with Mediterranean cultures. Very interesting to me. But you see that then elaborated in Theosophy, in later Theosophy, especially, you know, the post Blavatsky, Alice Bailey sort of, or Annie Besant kind of stuff. Maybe Mary Baker Eddy, I can't remember. But where you also see it is biblically. It's Keshet. Essentially after the flood, the biblical flood, the patriarch Noah, and you know, his whole retinue of animals and his family on the ark, they see a rainbow when the flood is over, and it's the rainbow of promise. And so these things, and it's very interesting, man, because this is such a cohesive, excellent episode. The conversation, it just keep rolling back on itself and unfolding further. It's the basis for the color magic of the Inner Order of the Golden Dawn. Is that idea, Keshet, the rainbow bridge that you have to pass through, or pass over to get to the other side of the veil, which is super interesting to me. So again, you know, you see it right in when we were, you know, maybe 100 years ago, when we had kind of very neatly, and you still can to some extent, right? Because everything's just this, again, granular hyperfixation on like, no, things need to change. We need to get them more precise. And really it just ends up being, and it ends up being one of those fucking stupid arguments. Is Pluto a planet? We don't know. We thought it was. It's the same fucking thing. How many colors are there in the rainbow? You know, we traditionally 7. What does that correspond to? The 7 classical planets. You know, so it's a pretty interesting thing. It has to do with white light when it passes through a prism reveals the fact that it contains a spectrum of 7 apparent colors, at least visible to the human eye. Now, we're not going scientific with this. We're understanding it as a spiritual analogy, right? Because we know that there are colors we can't see, ultraviolet, all that stuff. But what is communicated to the human in the experience of only being able to see 7 distinct colors? The lyre of Orpheus there, 7 distinct realms. Another, not only is it apt because of vibration, but because of music, right? In the Western scale, that's based on the Pythagorean form of ratio that was turned into music theory. In the West, we get what? We get 7 distinct tones in a musical scale. You know, so it's this separation into 7s not arbitrarily, because it creates a beautiful, it creates something that our minds, right, the divine part of ourselves, especially to people like Agrippa and in the Picatrix and stuff like that. The mind is the faculty that hears harmony, hears music in vibratory ratios, is proof that it's divine. So that's what the experience means. We're not talking about like how science divides itself into these 7. If you look at it that way, of course it's fucking arbitrary, because there's quarter tone scales. We don't have to work in the seven distinct, Western scale of music. But when we do, we find beautiful, rich harmony, and the mind likes it. And why does the mind like it? And according to the magical worldview, depending on where you are in time, but throughout, this has stayed the same. The mind is the higher faculties present within a human being is evidence that it is imparted with, that is the divine spark. That is the aspect of the divine that has been given to us. That is the Promethean fire. The fact that like we can recognize that and nothing else really. I mean, animals hear music and stuff like that too, but we can make it. Birds can sing, but they're not intentionally harmonizing the way Mozart did with 7 or 8 different string sections and piano, and that's incredible. That's miraculous. So the Rainbow Bridge is symbolic of what they called in the Qabalistic conception of the Golden Dawn is the Ruach, which are the 7 lower Sephiroth on the Tree of Life, which comprise the individual psyche. Ruach is corresponded to spirit in the Kabbalistic system, but it's essentially the interior mental faculties. I would say it's if we're talking about that scale that we just saw, we're talking about the physical, we're talking about the astral, and we're talking about the lower and higher manas, mental. That's the Ruach, really. So it's really those spheres that the rainbow represents, and those qualities. They're expressions in color and in sound of 7 super essential qualities, right, that we were talking about earlier.
All right. The importance of understanding the dynamics of magnetic interchange. I think this may tie into utilization of magic and what effect it may have when there is a male-female balance at play, perhaps. But yeah, what is this magnetic interchange, and how may it be efficiently worked with or utilized in energizing the imagination or arousing emotion or affecting?
Here's I like the word choice, arousing. This is called colloquially polarity magic, and it's a very powerful form of magic, and sometimes it's worked completely unconsciously. Often it is between very dynamic couples, specifically, and this is where Dion Fortune gets a bad rap, specifically between a male and a female. You cannot work polarity magic with 2 males or 2 females. Period. End of story. That's not how that works. You don't get to decide what polarity you are. That's not really what we're working with. So plus, if you're doing polarity magic, you want to embody the archetype as fully as you can. You know what I'm saying? Like that's going to make the magic more powerful. Yeah, you could be a very masculine male and a very feminine male, but it's still not going to be the same rousing of energy, because there are things that you inherently do not have as a male that you're not aware you don't have, because your experiential boundaries prevent you from understanding that you don't have that. You know, so, but you don't. So you can't work polarity magic between two men or two women. It has to be male, female. And it is, again, another circuit of force. It's a giving and a receiving and a sending back out. And it can be worked ritualistically. It can be worked one-to-one, in sort of it's energy work, really. And it can also be done as energy work in a ritual, in a temple setting with multiple people. You're going to want to have, to the best of your ability, an equal amount of male and female. That's another huge reason why the Golden Dawn was co-ed. People don't talk about it. They were working a kind of polarity magic. It wasn't just like, gee, we should let the women hang. You know, it was, you know, it's polarity magic that they're working. It's extremely powerful, but it's extremely dangerous. That's why Dion Fortune went to such great pains. And people nowadays, they call her a prude, you know, because they don't understand. You know, the people out here in the country, they have a saying, you know, I live out here, you can't fix stupid. But it's like, I say, I'm being facetious to make a point. You can't argue with anybody anymore. You can't, it doesn't matter. People will know that they're wrong and still defend their, still die on a hill. Let me fix my camera.
Okay.
It's just the camera. I'm not losing reception. So, but people called her a prude because they themselves are likely sex crazed. And you know what? Anyway, take two. People called her a prude because they were likely sexually imbalanced, and what is passing for freedom today is really debauchery. It's an extreme, and we don't realize it's an extreme, right? Our experiential bounds are preventing us from realizing that it's an extreme. And think about it also. If you are polarized to one side and you're looking at somebody who's in the middle, they're gonna look off balance. If you think you're the middle and you're looking at somebody who's actually the middle, they will appear to be imbalanced. So that's really, you know, the main issue with polarity magic nowadays. Dion Fortune went to great pains, as I was saying, to remove the stigma from sex in her day without becoming obsessed with it. Crowley was obsessed with sex and committed to removing the stigma. So that's really the problem. That was the problem with Crowley. So she wanted to raise, you know, literally, you know, cliche term, she wanted to raise the vibration of people by having them understand the underlying dynamics of polarity and polarity magic. Because that knowledge had been stifled. You know, it was like a big thing. They believed it to be a big thing in the ancient Egyptian temples. You know, they believed that the pharaoh and the queen were engaging in that kind of stuff. And this is all a lot of speculation based stuff, but in truth, it is a very powerful form of magic. You will see some of it in different kinds of tantra. I'm not talking about hippies having sex. I'm talking about actual tantric practices, tantra. But you know, the mechanisms are a little dicey because the thing is, people are going to engage with this stuff, and it's just going to devolve into orgies. And you're not supposed to have sex in polarity magic. The whole point, right, is building a charge. Build the charge. We don't want to release the charge, because every time you build that charge, if you have an orgasm physically, you ground it. You're grounding the energy. Polarity magic is meant to build the charge and then send it somewhere. Send it to healing, spiritual uses, apotropaic uses, which are protective. You know, so many different ways that you can utilize it. And if you're having the orgasm, if you're having the physical sex, you are grounding it in materiality. Yeah. So, you know, that's a huge thing. Like, people in our day and age, I don't know anybody that I could, you know what, you'd be a good candidate for polarity magic.
Yeah, I mean, to me, intuitively, it seems where it's at in terms of like most effectively building that charge that you're speaking of. Is animal magnetism related to this, or is that a different thing?
I mean, it depends on who you ask, right? Because the jury is out. We basically abandoned uh there's still there's centers for animal magnetism out there, but in terms of the mainstream, like we don't have any information about what's going on, like animal magnetism today, 2023, like we have no clue. So we don't really know, but I would say yes. I one of the first after I read the first thing I read after I finished the Circuit of Force was Anton Mesmer's memoir, The Discovery of Animal Magnetism. It's the first thing I read. And it enlightened a lot of stuff. Levy also talks about it. That's what he was really influenced by when he was talking about Azot being the magical agent. Azot be this is one of the best conversations I think I've had with you, with anybody. I've never had these conversations with anybody before, except for very high level initiates. You know, two people. You know, but this is really, really significant stuff. And like part of me is like, shit, do I let him put this out? Because this is what my fucking book is about for Lou Allen. You know, like the whole book's about this. But but so animal magnetism was a huge part of it, and it was essentially in the West, right? Franz Anton Mesmer, he basically through a series of he was a physician, but like through a series of medical experiments, he discovered proof of or demonstrable effects of what the East had just known to be chi, you know, for 1500 years, 1600 years, you know, maybe more, probably more than that, right? With the Taoist canons we have that talk about chi go very far back. And he just discovered that etheric magnetism, and then it influenced the French occult revival, right? And I mean, it changed everything. It worked. Mesmer worked his way into the lexicon of the world, right? We have the word mesmerized, right? Why? Because the state he was putting these people into, they called it somnambulance. He would
Oh, I was gonna
do these
ask you about that. Yeah.
he would do these magnetic passes on people, and he would magnetize their polarity to be completely passive, and he would take the active, and he taught other people to do this, and he would make them so passive that they would shut down and enter a state of what we call nowadays hypnosis. So hypnosis is more than mental, it's etheric, it's energetic, and he's shutting your energy off, like it's no, he's completely neutralizing into a passive state. And this was the discovery of hypnotism, but they called it mesmerism. And then later down the line, I think in like the mid 20th century, another guy called it hypnotism, because hypno means sleep in Greek. After 9 o'clock, it's all my dad would say to me when I was a kid. Hypno.
Okay, so
um,
somnambulism, is that the act of this process of hypnotism
so,
or
somnambulism is the hypnotic state. So
okay.
if I were like, somnambulism is this, you know,
Okay.
like I'm still aware, right? Because you can tell me things, you can put things into my brain, but I can barely react. There's like no sign of activity. It looks like I'm asleep. And that's somnambulism. So that the discovery in the West of that's the cultivation of that somnambulistic state, and then not only that, but he from use of animal magnetism, which in the Kabbalistic. So if you go back to that drawing that we had about the seven planes and the seven bodies and the seven planes, that's the vernacular I've used for it in the book. You have a higher and a lower. So you have the lower astral and you have the higher astral. That creates like 14 planes. right? You're splitting everything. You have the lower manas or lower mental and the higher mental. Now, you have that in the physical. You have the lower physical, which is dense matter, this actual stuff I can squeeze and pull and hit. And then you have the higher physical. That's your etheric energy. In Kabbalah, this is guf, and the etheric energy, the higher, is nefesh.
Okay.
So they discovered the nefesh and how to use it and how it could heal people, but also, right, because the difference between medicine and poison is the dose. You could heal people, but you could put them in a completely hypnotic state and influence them and tell them to go do stuff.
Yeah.
So that was the whole thing. But it's been completely whitewashed. I mean, I would wager that maybe 3 to 10% of the people that are going to hear this have ever even heard of Anton Mesmer and animal magnetism, but it was fucking huge until the 40s. And then it just turned into hypnotism, which was huge until about 15 years ago. That's the amazing thing about occult history. The occult history is literally it's the history behind history.
Yeah, 100%. Talking about the astral and the astral light in particular, according to Levy, who credits Martinez Pasquale for the term astral light, he says that it was the universal agent and represented as the fiery body of the Holy Spirit, represented by Baphomet and the rites of the Templars. Do you agree with this, or how would you describe the astral light?
The astral light that he's talking about is the nefesh. He's talking about the nefesh. He's talking about the halo, right? The holy body. He's talking about the avgoedis of the Neoplatonists, the glowing aura. He's talking about all of that, the spirit body, the body of light, what have you. But that's not what the astral means today. Blavatsky talked about it in the same way. Levy talked about it that way. I've not seen it referenced in Martina de Pasquale, and I just finished the audiobook for his treatise on the reintegration of being. I've never seen him refer to it as the astral light. Although I wasn't reading it in the original French. I was reading a translation. So that could be in there. But after Blavatsky, when Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater took over Theosophy, they claimed to have their own ascended contacts, their ascended masters called inner contacts. And what they did was they moved the locus of authority from her. She became a quasi-prophetic figure, right? Because it was her, William Quan Judge, and Henry Steele Olcott started this Theosophical Society, and she was the only one who had contact with ascended masters. Nobody had even fucking heard of that before. And then for some reason, right? Oh, maybe it's a coincidence. She releases a series of books, and now everybody has ascended masters, right? Everybody, the 16-year-old in the occult section, the self-help section of fucking Barnes and Noble, is talking to 3 or 4 different people who are initiating her in the fucking astral. So, it's what they did was horrible, but they appropriated that mechanism and they redefined her terminology, and they reassigned the astral to the imaginal.
Okay.
So when we talk about the astral now,
we're
talking about the imagination, the imaginal realm. We're no longer referring to the nefesh, the body of light, as the astral.
Okay. I think, there's this part I wanted to read. I'll go ahead and just read it and ask my question. It says the means of perceiving and working with the subtle manifestation of the astral light is by means of the imagination, like you're saying. By this term, a trained imagination is intended and trained in dedication rather than in technicality. To the trained imagination, the images that arise are those that pertain or are analogous to truth. To the untrained or uninitiated imagination, the images will be distorted, erroneous, or subjective. They will be mirror images of the interior condition, not clear sight of that which lies objectively beyond. Thus, clairvoyance or clear-sightedness in its true sense is a function of the imagination. It is a function of the seer. Levy calls this function the plastic mediator, which in English at any rate is not particularly fallacious term. Alternatively, he uses the term translucid, which is a little better, although we would prefer to use yet another suggestion, the diaphane. We might also think in terms of a body of light with appropriate sensory powers of the inner light. For Eliphas Levi says the diaphane is a portion of the astral light that is particular to each one of us. So to me, that kind of seemed like the spirit or the divine spark, and I don't know if that's correspondent with an nefesh. But for one, I was wondering if you see it that way, and then two, if you could say more about this diaphane. Is it, anything more about that diaphane thing?
I have a lot to say, but I have to pee, so I'll be right
Okay,
back.
go be.
All right.
You remember
Um,
our subject matters?
yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about the connection between that Dion Fortune is talking about with the imaginal and the body of light. And I also want to say, obviously diaphanous just means translucent. So
Okay.
that's what that means. Phanes is in there, right? That's the Greek root that means light. So the whole idea is that you have to look at that hierarchy, that ladder, the planes and the bodies, as I call it. Each higher one, right? We were talking about this. The way that kind of mode of like vibration and sending things down. Each higher thing controls its lower. It's the same in the system of Agrippa, right? He talks about the threefold world, and he talks about how there's the divine noetic realm, the celestial realm, and the terrestrial or elemental realm. Okay, so that's your layout. But there's a direction of flow, and it's always coming from the higher to the lower, right? He says all superiors rule over their inferiors, and all inferiors are governed by their superiors. So that's not to say, right, the entire premise of his theurgy, his reconstruction of Iamblichian theurgy in the Renaissance, is predicated on also going upward, right? That's his whole thing, is utilizing, he calls them sigillum, which means signatures. Iamblichus called them synthemata, which means the same fucking thing. They were doing the same thing. They were going up, and it was the higher was coming down. Again, what is that? That's a circuit. That's the circuit of force. That's exactly what it is. Thing is, it's not one thing, right? There's a circuit of force between you and your higher and your spiritual organism. There's a circuit of force between you and your, the different polarity. There's all sorts of different ways, because it's the same thing with alchemy, right? It's like it's the underlying pattern is the same. It's the same thing. So I can everywhere, it's holographic and fractal. I can utilize the circuit of force in many different microcosms. So you just have to identify where the poles are. That's all it is. It sounds simple, but nowadays it's getting a little fucking crazy. But
is that what's meant by the twofold vibration? There's a part in there where it's talking about directing the astral light and saying we need to understand the twofold vibration. And it kind of tied it into that lyre symbolism, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you can unpack that for like an hour, but just to kind of stay on point and finish what I was saying, because it's getting harder as I get older to do that. But is so it's true in the bodies and planes of that hierarchy we were looking at, that ladder, and we should provide that image for people so that they can look at it.
Even the lyre one?
Yeah, but the lyre and the other one. Like, even if we just take a picture of it and just put it in like show notes or something, because there's no way they're going to understand this without that visual. But the mental body, right, is higher than the astral, and so it projects itself down into the astral. and it generates imaginative images, right? The images eventuate in our actions. It's cognitive behavioral therapy. As I think, so I feel, so I act. It's that chain downward. So the imagination, right? The difference between that and an uninitiated person is that the magician understands, oh wow, this is how I can control this. You're telling me all I have to do. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but it's extremely difficult to get complete control of your mind enough to be able to create images in your imagination and then ensoul them and completely build up that etheric charge to literally express that in the universe. That's the kind of magic these people are talking about. But basically what he's alluding to there is the fact, or what she's alluding to there, is that you're using the mental to create the astral image and the emotion behind that image. And then from there, again, working downward, you can control the higher physical. You can Dion Fortune goes into this in Psychic Self-Defense and Sane Occultism. She has a lot of early works where she's talking about creating thought forms and then turning them into autonomous etheric instruments. I mean, for lack of a better word, it's a golem. She talks about how they will drain you of your energy if you create a thought form that then becomes alive on the etheric, and it exteriorizes itself. You will maintain a tie to that. She gives some exercises of kind of severing those ties, and a lot of people use that now for, like, I call back all my power and I sever all my ties to every negative boyfriend. That comes from Dion, well, her, and they were doing it in the earlier theosophical stuff, but this kind of etheric tie to these entities that occultists accidentally create sometimes.
Yeah.
Because you can exteriorize it if there's enough emotion behind it, without like intentionally crafting this thing. As a matter of fact, that's the number one cause of most phantasms in like the outer order of the Golden Dawn, or probably I see it around the Zelator grade, the Earth grade, is people become paranoid. There's a species of paranoia that kicks in, and they become obsessed with these certain, like, this things lurking in the outer darkness. And then what happens is, if that's allowed to build up and they get emotional enough about it, things actually start being there because they've now exteriorized by way of that charge, right? Their thought forms, which are who knows what, all manner of terrifying things.
I think this ties in nicely to what I wanted to touch on next, with you're talking about like that draining of energy aspect. The demon lover. I want to read this part. It says, when pathological conditions are combined with esoteric knowledge, we may have the rare scenario, such as Dion Fortune describes in her novel, The Demon Lover. And in one or two of the secrets of Dr. Taverner stories, such a combination is very rare, but similar principles pertain in the larvae that hang around the polluted astral atmosphere of brothels and other venues associated with sexual perversity, drugs, and violence. Again, preoccupation with things of the world, even in a comparatively respectable sense, can result in souls acquisitively hanging around former habitations or sites, concealed valuables. Eventually, the stars draw up the materially based astral forces, which divide naturally into their elements according to the planetary configurations of astrology. With the inevitable dissolution, there can be a struggle as the former vices or obsessions rise up and amuse monstrous, nightmarish shapes that eventually drive off the misdirected soul. This is an aspect of the dweller on the threshold, which is a mirror image of the shadow side of the soul. In religious terms, it is an aspect of purgatory. That's wild.
That's funny because that's exactly, if you hadn't finished that sentence off, I was going to be like, what do you think purgatory is? You know, that's literally what it is. So I've done a lot of research and work with this kind of stuff too. One of my favorite things to write about, believe it or not, I wrote something for the Theosophical Research Society's journal concerning this. I think for next month, for November, it's called Hungry Ghosts. And I also wrote an article about this in Tum Xantorum, Volume 4, that the anthology that Sean Woodward just put out. And if you want to learn anything about this kind of stuff, there's another book. So I just happen to have like this amazing trilogy of books, right? I read The Circuit of Force. I read The Discovery of Animal Magnetism. And I read John Michael Greer's Monsters. Now that seems like one of his most outrageous books. You know, like, what's this about? This sounds, what is, like, you picturing like Frankenstein and stuff. He talks about the astral etheric basis of all of these phenomenon, you know, etheric vampires, the etheric body, ghosts, apparitions. It's an incredible book. I recommend every serious occultist get it and fucking read it today.
What was the name of that one again?
Monsters.
Monsters by John Michael Greer.
Yeah, and he's got such a great writing style too. You know, it's just a fucking pleasure to read his stuff. It's like a lot of the occult, like Dion Fortune, hands down one of my favorites from that era. You know, my favorite from that era. Difficult to read. You know, a lot of people don't like to read her because she sounds like she's talking down to you, like she's scolding you. Like, get past it. You know, whatever, you know, disciplinarian female figure you have, like, get over that fucking trauma, because like once you're past that you know, sophomoric hang up, I mean, it's a fucking treasure trove of information she's giving out.
Yeah,
you know, for nothing. You know, like, I spent like $12 on this book, and I like put everything together for me. You know, so but so that said, with those as resources for our wonderful patrons here, there's a couple of different things that happen. We talked about the Kabbalistic divisions of the soul. Talk about the Ruach, right, which are the lower 7 Sephiroth. So that includes Chesed, Geburah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, right? They sort of fit neatly in, you know, they filter down into Malkuth. So Yesod directs those forces. Malkuth contains them. Malkuth is the container. It's the vessel for all the forces. They have to pass through Yesod in order to manifest. But Malkuth is the final manifestation. It's the bowl. That's why it's 4 colors, because everything here is mixed. We have that in elemental theory of Empedocles and of the Greek philosophers, and of Agrippa, and of what have you. They're all saying you cannot completely isolate an element in Earth, in the terrestrial sphere, in Malkuth of Messiah. You can't do it, because everything is irreparably mixed, you know. So that's the nature of Prakriti, right? Constantly changing. And it's basically ensouled by the Ruach. Now, when we talked about this twofold division earlier of the lower and the higher. And you can see that in Malkuth. Think of the sphere, the Sephira of Malkuth, right? So citrines at the top, olive, russet, and black. The bottommost portion is black. That's the physical body. The uppermost portion is air. elemental air, right?
Yes.
That's citrine. That's the higher physical. That's your nefesh. That's your etheric body. So that it's divide. We have that the guf and the nefesh, the black and the citrine. When the physical body dies, the ruach withdraws. What's lower portions of the ruach can remain stuck in the nefesh. If the emotional life of the nefesh, the impulses, has been conditioned by materiality, Plotinus, right? The soul, it doesn't want to leave. You know, same thing. Iamblichus saying theurgy. Why? Because we want to leave. If you're conditioned by matter, if the soul is conditioned by matter, will not fucking ascend. So you have to learn how, while you're alive, to let the fuck go. Now, talk about what? Drugs. Talks about possessions, wealth, guarding treasure, emotional attachments, impulsive attachments like drugs and sex, sexual perversity. These things nowadays that are like, yeah, line me up, set my fucking plate. Guess what? You're a fucking slave. You know, you're literally becoming enslaved to the things you are mistaking as good. Because somebody a long time ago told you that, oh, you know, you're not supposed to do that. You've lived your whole fucking life doing that. You know, so I don't, again, right? My experiential bounds are preventing me from having a gnosis of what the other side is like. I have a knee-jerk reaction to shit people told me. I didn't live it. So now I'm going to the opposite end. Do whatever the fuck I want. I'm gonna eat ice cream all goddamn day. I'm gonna fuck my brains out. It's gonna be amazing. I'm gonna drink, do drugs, you know. And people will do this stuff, and then they'll tell you, well, everything in moderation. The act in and of itself is immoderate. Leave it the fuck alone. You know, that's the whole thing. People say like, oh yeah, you know, on the you know, the one of the maxims over the Delphic Oracle is nothing in excess. You know, yes, nothing in excess, but that's not an excuse to go do things that are harmful, intrinsically harmful to the body.
Yeah,
and
it's
again,
like
it brings
murder.
up the whole question.
Don't murder in excess. It's like don't murder at all.
Well, the whole thing is like, you know, don't kill yourself too much.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. It's like in our culture, we're like, you can't hurt him. Leave him alone. Don't say negative things. But it's like, well, what about self-harm? Are we like so morally fucking bereft and backwards that we can advocate self-harm? Because it's like, well, that's your choice. That's your right. Still, you don't advocate that. That's what doing these things does. Drinking, I don't care what the fuck you say. Drinking alcohol is self-harm. It's just what it is. You know, I smoke a fucking pipe. Self-harm. I'm not lying to myself about it. I just can't stop. It's the truth. You know, so, you know, people say, well, I don't want to stop. No, you can't stop. You know, deal with that. Sit with that for a fucking while. You don't want to stop because you can't stop, because it would suck to stop. Yeah. But ultimately, it would be what was the most healthy for you.
For sure.
So, well, it's the whole thing. You know, it's amazing. Jocko Willink, you know, he says it perfectly. If you want to like look to people in the mainstream, discipline is freedom. If you can't say no, you're not free, right? If it's a yes every time, you know, if you literally cannot tell yourself, I'm not going to do this anymore, then it's not a choice. So, these things that affect us like this will keep the nefesh here for a while. It will eventually dissolve. But this is the idea of a hungry ghost. That they call them hungry. Why? Because they have a fucking appetite. They walk around their net. They're not full ghosts. They're not eating ghosts. They're hungry ghosts. Because no matter how much they eat, they're still hungry. That's what's keeping them here. And it was the same thing. That's what they were trying to do in ancient Egypt with that statuary and ensouling the Ka of the pharaoh. They were keeping his etheric vampire alive. Of the pharaoh, you know, because he wanted immortal life and they believed him to be an incarnated god. They would create statues and burial temples and literally guide the etheric body after death of the pharaoh into a statue that looked like him, and then leave it food. You know, like it's insane. These practices ultimately, you know, short-sighted. Because it ties the ruach here until it has to dissolve. Eventually, it has to dissolve. But you're literally wandering the earth with you are a disembodied consciousness with no way to gratify the desires your soul has been conditioned by. That's a kind of hell. Yeah. And then eventually, when the nefesh finally releases, the ruach ascends. The ruach then further becomes absorbed into, it doesn't dissipate the way the guf and the nefesh dissipate, right? They turn into other things, right? The body turns into, you know, in an archaic sense, turns into soil, organic matter. The nefesh dissipates into energy. The ruach becomes absorbed in the neshama, which is divided into the neshama, hia, and yekida. And the yekida that's the part of you that is with the divine, so to speak. So that's the way that happens. Now the thing is, there are these hauntings that occasionally happen that seem completely like I don't want to say autonomous, but it's like an automaton, something that doesn't have a mind of its own. So sometimes you'll see you can interact with spirits, ghosts. I'm sure plenty of people have done that. I've done that. I'm not calling them forth, but you'll see stuff and it'll kind of react to you. There's another species of apparition that is kind of like automated. I remember hearing that there was in some part of Rome, a certain time of year, you would the people to this day, or at least maybe like 4 or 5 years ago when I was there, I think it might have been Bath, where the Roman legions were. They created those baths. A certain time of year, you will just hear footsteps like soldiers marching through the streets, and nobody knows what the fuck it is.
Wow.
And there's plenty of instances like that in like folk traditions and stuff. We call that an etheric echo, and that is something that was so emotional, such an emotional thing occurred there that it echoes at a specific trigger or a time. Nobody really knows why or how, and it's completely autonomous. It's etheric energy that has organized itself into such a circuit. It's on a loop. That's all it is. It has there's no indwelling ruach to it, but it just continues to do its thing until eventually, who knows when, it'll burn its energies out. Now, the last thing I want to say, I completely spaced, but I wanted to get it down because like I told you, I'm using this to really flesh out the book. So I'm like, let me just get all these ideas out of my head, so when I listen back later, you know?
Yeah. Well, before we close out, one of my favorite parts about the Circuit of Force is the part where she references Ernst Lehr's his book Man or Matter, and it gets into the ethers, which I love so much. And I was wondering if you don't mind if I read a couple pages, just because I find it so interesting. Maybe the listeners will too, because it just speaks to so much. So, okay. By this, we are led to an awareness of the existence of the ether, the fourfold subtle condition of matter that lies beyond the 3 physical states that we know as solid, liquid, and gas. We can tabulate these 7 states of physical/etheric matter using the old traditional elemental titles. So it lays out the 3 levity forces and then 3 gravity forces, the warmth ether being in the middle. So we've got the life ether, chemical ether, and light ether as the levity forces. Then we got the warmth ether as elemental fire that sits in between, and the gaseous state, element of air, liquid state, element of water, solid state, element of earth, associated with the gravitational forces. Solid, liquid, and gas, the 3 lower states of matter, are all subject to gravity, with the possible exception of the 2 lightest gases, hydrogen and helium, whose natural habitat seems to be outer space. In parentheses, helium was first discovered on the sun by spectrographic analysis, hence its name. The 4 higher states, however, respond to a polar opposite principle that we may call levity, and in order of increasing subtlety, They are known as the warmth ether, light ether, chemical ether, and life ether. These ethers have nothing to do with the much debated ether of physical science, a possible medium of electromagnetic phenomenon. They are more in the nature of powers, that is to say, form-creating powers that enable the forms of chemical elements, crystals, plant and animal organisms, human beings to manifest in terms of solid, liquid, and gaseous states of matter within the physical world. The ethers that work under the principle of levity are creators of form. The states of matter that work under the principle of gravity are expressors of form. The warmth ether, or element of fire, is a borderland condition between the two domains. It has an alternative title of chaoticizing ether, insofar that it prepares or breaks up lower states so that they may be receptive to new archetypal impressions of form. At one level, this may be seen in the plasma at the center of the stars and planets, in particular of the Earth itself. At another level, in the way a seed brings forth new life in a new cycle of form expression. It is the light ether that brings about the proliferation of forms. The alternate cycle of night and day gives an aspect of weaving. An alternative name is thus the weaving ether. It has an analog with the image-making thought process of man, weaving many forms from different strands of fantasy. An interesting analogy is the property of light demonstrated in a camera obscura, whereby, with the use of a pinhole light in a darkened room, a whole external daylight scene can be encapsulated at a single pinhole point. This is like the potential form in a seed. The image expands from the pinpoint to be reproduced on the screen inside the chamber, just as the seed expresses its form in the subsequent growth of a plant. It is these forms of analogy that interest spiritual scientists in particular branches of mathematics, for instance, projective geometry, wherein transformations and projections of forms are expressed through passing at different angles through a point. One of the pioneers of this form mathematics was the great 17th century scientist and mystic Blaise Pascal. Much of the phenomena and properties of electricity have their origin in the light ether, which accounts for the similarity of the observed phenomena of light and electromagnetic waves by observational outer science. In esoteric terms, it might be said that electricity is light under conditions of gravity. The chemical ether has the rather unlikely alternative name of sound ether, which comes about because all of the chemical elements are distinguished from one another simply by the principle of number in the periodic table. Their properties depend upon the number of electrons and protons that make up their atomic structure. Number is also a key to sound and the principles of harmony, which of course is part and parcel of Pythagorean mysticism. The principle of form is not merely a question of a body's external shape, it is an inner quality, and it is from this inner quality, based upon number, that external qualities such as color, taste, smell, healing, or harmful properties depend. Esoterically speaking, there is also a link between the chemical ether and magnetism, which is observable in atomic physics by the invariants that prevail in energy jumps from one electron shell to another. Thus, magnetic fields are a form of sound ether mastered by gravity. The most subtle ether, the life ether, is responsible for manifestation and physical expressions of all forms, whether crystalline or organic in solid physical expression. Its alternative title is the world ether. This is because of its relationship to the sound ether. If the different chemical elements be regarded as different voices, singing forth a note in accordance with the numerical principle of harmony, their combination into forms may be likened to that formless sound being formed into intelligent and intelligible words. This may be regarded as the great chorus of creation. The archetypal forms created in the etheric world can be perceived by the trained imagination, sometimes called the eye of the spirit, or what Rudolf Steiner terms imaginative perception, or simply imagination, using this much abused word in its rightful sense. This method of seeing is to perceive, not the light reflecting object in the corporeal world, but the light itself as it weaves the archetypal image that structures the object. This faculty of perceiving with the eye of the spirit is possessed by all, and although it is generally lost after early childhood, it can be reacquired by the type of exercises in observation inaugurated by Goethe. Beyond the acquisition of etheric awareness through the eye of the spirit, further training can lead to perception of the astral world beyond the etheric. This entails the development of an intuitive form of perception unto the sevenfold world of extraterrestrial force fields, which play upon the Earth sphere, the 7 traditional planets. That is to say, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sol, Venus, Mercury, and Luna designate these fields of influence. There is a connection between the sevenfold astral influences and these physical celestial bodies as observed from the Earth, but it is not in the nature of a direct connection. Their movements and angular relationships are simply subject to the same higher powers that govern the astral forces within the Earth. These 7 principles or spiritual qualities provide the impulses that stir the etheric and physical forces into action. As the physical/etheric world was expressed through polar principles of levity and gravity, so is the astral world, the polarities being expressed in the traditional alchemical terms of sulfur and salt, with a mercurial mean between them. So I just fucking love that part. But
Yeah, I mean that's an area of this stuff that I have no fucking clue what a lot of that meant. But it's like I will admit my complete lack of comprehension in a lot of that stuff. But I think that your grounding in
oh shit, hold
alchemy.
on. The sound cut out for a second. Testing 1 2.
Can you hear me?
Let me see something. Testing.
I can hear you.
I
Can you hear
cannot
me?
hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yep.
I'll just put it on my regular speaker.
Hold on 1 second. Let me see.
Okay. I can hear you now. I shifted over to my computer audio, so.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yeah, I think the grounding you have, I think the grounding you have in alchemy helps you kind of like parse that stuff. I also think like the reading you've done and the stuff that you've done with Doug Gabriel, those podcast episodes you did with them were fucking awesome. But I'd be lying if I said I understood more than 30% of it. But but the 30% I understood was great. So I mean, what do you? I have a question for you. How do you wrap your head around that stuff? Like, what were you reading when you kind of were like, oh, okay, I get it. This makes sense.
I mean, to me, it's just like the background forces that it's just a layer deeper than the elements. Like, I think about the elements and then I understand them, but those help inform my understanding of what creates the forces that the elements have in their manifestation and how that works.
That is helpful, actually. Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, I love it so much. What do you have for closing thoughts? Anything?
Buy the book when it comes out, the Llewellyn book that I'm doing, Etheric Magic, even though I talked a lot about it tonight, a lot of the stuff that's going in the history and theory section. But this book is going to have practices, practical Western stuff. You're not going to be doing the chakras. You're not going to be doing the tattvas. There are 2 main systems in the Western esoteric tradition so far that have suggested energy work to me and in their descriptions in ancient literature, and have proven energy work in their practice. And that is alchemy, and particularly the branch of astrological magic that is talismanic. So I am developing a system of Western energy work that is grounded in the symbolism and techniques of those two Western esoteric arts, and that's going to be the book. So it's definitely going to be worth getting a hold of. Plus, there, it'll be much more well thought out and presented than just the stuff that I vomited up tonight because of how excited I was, because of what an excellent conversation and great questions and insight from you, Sky. So thank you.
Yes. Also, you've got a bit of blog posts built up now on your website too. So I'd say people go check that out. IkeBaker.com. And of course, your YouTube, Arcanum with a V.
Thank you. Thank you.
As for me, check me out on my other stuff, Philosophical Minds podcast. Thank you all who support this. Thank you all who have purchased shirts. Greatly appreciate it so much. And with that, until next time.
Awesome.